Do you have family and friends that you want to convert to the Catholic faith? We all do. In this video, I'm going to lay out a step-by-step guide that's going to allow you to have a plan whenever you talk to people who you're trying to convert, so that you can present the truth to them in love with a strategy. But before we even get into any of the content of this video, I want to say that the greatest service that you can do to your fellow man is to lead them from error to truth. In fact, you can measure how much you love somebody by how much you bring them closer to God. So if you say you love somebody and you have nice feelings towards them, but you cause them to sin, or you permit them to sin and to live in falsehood and in error, then you do not love them, at least not the way that you should. So what we have to do if we want to truly love our family and our friends is do our best to lead them from falsehood to truth. So in this video, I'm going to explain exactly how to do that. So step 0, before we even get into step number 1, the first thing that you have to do, and this is obvious, you have to pray for them. St. Augustine says very clearly that the conversion of one sinner to the truth is a greater thing than the creation of the entire universe. Why does he say that? He says that because whenever God created the universe, he owed the universe nothing, and the universe owed him nothing. And when he created it, it was purely an act of goodness. But whenever God converts a sinner from error, falsehood, lies, deception, to the truth and to grace, he's not squaresies to start with. He's not even with the sinner. The sinner already owes him everything. The sinner has already offended him. And so whenever God takes that person from sin to grace, he's doing something greater than when he created the entire universe. So we need to appreciate this is not about just changing people's minds. It's not about winning arguments. What it's about is saving souls and bringing souls to Christ through the one holy Catholic and apostolic church, which he instituted for that purpose. And in order to do that, you can't just win arguments. You have to have grace. You have to have a tremendous amount of grace. So I advise you not even to have these conversations generally unless you're already praying for the conversion of sinners. In St. Maria Faustina's diary, Jesus tells her the prayer that pleases him the most is the prayer for the conversion of sinners. So start there. Start there before you have any conversations with anybody, before you send any text messages or make any phone calls. Start there, because prayer is going to open up the doors, and prayer is going to allow God into that person's life in a radical way. Because ultimately, you're not going to convert anyone, right? It's impossible for you, a sinner and a wretched man or woman, to convert anybody to the Catholic faith. And I'm talking to myself as well here. It's not my job to convert anybody. If somebody watches this video and then converts, it's not because of me. It's in spite of me and because of God's mercy and goodness and God's grace and his election and his calling. So step 0, we have to pray. And then step number 1, you have to figure out where they are. You can't talk to somebody about the Eucharist if they don't believe in God yet. You have to figure out where the person is and what's actually holding them back from having that personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Is it a misunderstanding? Is it the fact that somebody wronged them in the past? Maybe a priest said something he shouldn't have? What is it that's holding them back? You have to figure that out and then start dealing with that. That's where you have to start, is by figuring out what is stopping this person from becoming a saint. I teach an RCIA class, and I was lecturing once, and I referenced a quote of St. Augustine. And I noticed the people in the room kind of look around a little uneasy. So I stopped and I said, okay, raise your hand if you know who St. Augustine is. And maybe 3 out of the 30 people raised their hand. So I had to go back and I had to explain who St. Augustine is, why his opinion matters, and why we should listen to him. Then I continued on with my lecture, and I saw light bulbs going off and people going on, that is, and people really were resonating with what I had to say. It's the same thing whenever you're talking to somebody and trying to convert them. You have to make sure that you're discussing with them. You have to make sure you're not talking past them or alongside them, but you have to enter into conversation with them and deal with the problems that they actually have. And one of the ways that you can do this that's masterful is listen very carefully, and then after they finish, say, okay, so what you're saying is da-da-da-da-da-da. And then you say, is that about right? And then they'll say, yes, that's exactly what I mean. Or they'll say, yes, except for, or they'll say, no, 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 you're misunderstanding me. But what that's going to allow you to do is actually have a discussion with the person and actually address their problems directly and not just what you think their problems are. This is an incredibly powerful communication tool for marriage, for relationships, for jobs, for anything. And we need to use it also in our apologetics. Okay, so you've prayed, you've figured out what their problem is. Now you need to have an answer to it. And this video is not going to go through each and every possible Protestant objection because there are hundreds of them. But what I am going to say is you need to focus on stories and you need to focus on transformation. This is something Protestants usually do better than Catholics, and there's a reason for it. Protestants are very, very prone to give their testimonies and very prone to share their experiences and how Christ has helped them. That's a beautiful thing to do. But Protestant theology is so flimsy, it's so weak that that's all that they have to resort to most of the time. The reason that Protestants share testimonies more than Catholics is because Protestants don't have a rigorous, strict theological and philosophical tradition that dates all the way back to the apostles that they can fall back upon. They don't. What Protestants have is the Bible and then each person's interpretation of the Bible, and that creates a very shaky foundation. Protestants are still to this day debating if Christ is really present in the Eucharist or not. They don't know. Some say yes, some say no, some say yes in this way and no in that way, but there's no consensus among Protestants. And if you can't answer that question about the Eucharist, that very basic question, is Christ really present in the Eucharist? Then you can't go on to define consanguinity or to define any of these other questions that arise after you get the first question right. That's the way any science works. You answer one question, you solve one problem, and two more questions arise. I used to teach, and I could tell how well my students were grasping the material based upon the types of questions that they asked. If you don't understand the principles of the science, then you're not even able to ask the correct questions. So Protestant theology, since they don't have a magisterium, they're constantly fighting back and forth over the same questions over and over again, and they don't actually make any progress further. So what they rely on is testimonies. They tell stories. They tell their own stories. They tell the Bible stories over and over and over again. And that's powerful in a certain way because the human brain is hardwired to listen to stories and to draw out inferences and to draw out morals. That's how God created us. And that's why the Bible, the inspired scriptures, are probably 80% stories. Most of the Bible is a storybook that even children could understand at a pretty basic level. So once you have prayed for them, once you've figured out what their problem is, and it doesn't have to be your whole testimony, but share a short little snippet from your own life. Maybe you tell them a story about how you just had no peace, you had no consolation, you were distraught, you went into a chapel and you prayed a rosary for a half an hour, and you left and you felt so much better. Just tell them a short story addressing how you've had a similar problem to them and you solved it with the Catholic faith. I have tons of stories of young men who I work with. I do some coaching with young men, and I advise them to start praying the rosary daily. And I've had so many success stories, so many. One man told me that he prayed the rosary for one day, and his desire to watch filth on the internet decreased by 90% after that first time, and it stayed away so long as he continued to pray the rosary. I've had other men tell me that as long as they're praying the rosary daily, they win their battles against lust. And whenever they stop praying the rosary, that's whenever they fall. So I've got stories like that in my back pocket whenever I'm talking to a man who I want to start to pray the rosary. I'll tell him, hey, look, this guy who's just like you, he started to pray the rosary and it solved his problems. This other guy that's just like you, he started to pray the rosary and it solved his problems. Me, right? I started to pray the rosary and my vices went away and I became a better man and I became ready to be a husband and a father. So you want to start by saying, hey, look, I'm just like you. I had a similar struggle. If you're a convert, your story is going to be especially powerful. But realize where they're coming from, understand their problem, understand it deeply, and say, yes, I'm just like you, and this is how I overcame that obstacle. If you can form it into a story, then your words are going to carry so much more weight. If you can focus on the transformation that you yourself experienced in adoration, in mass, in confession, and focus on that, they're not going to feel comfortable. Protestants are not going to feel comfortable saying, well, you're wrong. Confession didn't actually help you. You say it did, you think it did, you're tricked, but you're wrong. Very few Protestants are going to say that. What Protestants probably are going to say is they're going to listen to your testimony. They're going to listen to you share how you found the true peace and grace of Christ. And then they're going to say, huh. They may not agree with you, but they're also not going to call you a liar. If you're telling the truth and you're sharing your own story from your heart, they're not going to call you a liar. No. So what do? You pray for them, you figure out what their issue is, and you tell a story how Christ and his church has helped you to find peace and joy. After you've done that, and they're starting to think, well, the Catholic Church at least worked for this person, praying the rosary at least worked for this person, and they have a similar problem as to what I have. Once they start thinking that way, then you can introduce the fathers and the history of the church. Listen, people don't care about history and they don't care about theology. Most people, some do, but most people care about how does this impact me? Why does this matter to me? And a lot of people aren't sharp enough to see how these principles of theology, how Trinitarian theology, how Christology, how soteriology, they're not sharp enough to see how these abstract principles affect their day-to-day life. And so if you start talking about deep Trinitarian theology or Christology, a lot of people are going to kind of tune out. What you have to start with is say, look, you have this problem. I had that problem. I prayed the rosary and it went away. And then they'll be like, oh, this solves problems. This isn't just some up in the clouds highfalutin theology or philosophy that I don't understand. This solves problems and it matters to people. Once you've established that, then you can start talking about the theology and the philosophy a little bit more. And this is where you bring in the church fathers. And this is not going to be a masterclass on the fathers either. I have a bunch of content about that already. I have a bunch of content about Protestant apologetics already. If you want, you can go check out those videos if you want to deep dive into that. But you have to have some familiarity with the fathers, especially St. Augustine. St. Augustine is the most influential man in all of Western history outside of Jesus and the apostles. St. Augustine, in a very real way, laid the foundation for the entire Western Christian thought. It is impossible to overstate the influence that this man had. And if any of you out there is worried that you're wasting your life or worried that you may not be as holy as God wants you to be, you're worried that it's too late for you and that you're not able to become a saint anymore, listen, St. Augustine was a teenage dad. St. Augustine fathered a child with a woman he was not married to at 17 years old. St. Augustine's life was in absolute shambles. He fell into some very dark and dirty heresies, and he ends up living with his girlfriend for 17 years before she finally leaves him and his conversion really kicks into effect. If you think that your life is already too far gone, it is not. You are not a worse sinner than St. Augustine was. And if he were here, he would tell you as much. St. Augustine was one of the most wretched, miserable men on the planet. His job was, as a rhetorician, to lie about the emperor's actions to make him look good. St. Augustine lied publicly to thousands of people over and over again on the daily. St. Augustine was absorbed with all of the sins of the flesh. He was a thief. He was a cheat. He was everything that you could possibly be that was wrong. He had broken all 10 of the commandments multiple times. And God made him the pillar of Western theology and philosophy. If God can take St. Augustine and make him into St. Augustine, then God can take you and make you into the saint that you're supposed to be. No matter how far gone you think you are, if you give your life to Christ today, you give him your heart, you surrender everything to him, and you say, Jesus, I have made a mess of my life, but the mess is yours. I give it to you. Please clean it up. Do what you can with me. Please, Lord, I submit everything to you. God is going to work miracles, and you're not going to believe the transformation that you experience almost overnight. So do that, and do not think that you are too far gone. Augustine wasn't, and neither are you. So get to know the church fathers a little bit, especially Augustine. Augustine's going to carry a tremendous amount of weight with Protestants generally. And I also want to say this. I speak quite adamantly against Protestantism. Why do I do that? It's because I don't hate Protestants. I believe and am convicted in my heart of hearts that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, established the Catholic Church, that he built it upon Peter the rock, and he shed his blood for it. I believe that the Catholic Church is the one means of salvation available to all men. I believe that because the church teaches it. I believe it because the church teaches it with the authority of Christ himself. I believe that. And since I believe that, I don't want my Protestant brothers and sisters to be in error. I don't want them to rebel against the mother, the church. I don't want that at all. I want us all to be united in the sheepfold, to be united in the one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, established. That's what I want. So whenever I speak against Lutheranism or Calvinism, I'm not speaking against Lutherans or Calvinists. I'm speaking against their ideas and their philosophy because it's pernicious, because it's divisive, because it detracts from the glory of God and the glory of the saints in the Catholic Church. My prayer is the same as the prayer of Christ, that we all may be one as he and the Father are one. And the only solution to Christian division is the papacy. We all need to submit to one visible head instituted by Christ. We all need to submit to Peter in order to have the unity that Christ wants for his church. So if you're a Protestant and you're watching this, I'm not insulting you. You have good reasons to believe the things that you believe. I sincerely think that you are misled. You've been lied to. You've been deceived. And I want to disabuse you of those notions so that we can be fully in communion in the bosom of the Catholic Church. And to conclude all of this, let me just say that you could do everything in this video right. You could lay out an airtight, logical argument in defense of the Catholic Church. You could tell your own conversion story, how you went from being miserable to finding peace in Christ and in his church. And still, you may not get the conversion that you want. If that happens, what you have to do is surrender your will to God's and remember that Jesus Christ wills the salvation of every single man, woman, and child on earth. And he's in charge. God determines what happens, when it happens, and how it happens. So if you have a desire to pray for somebody, you have a desire to try to convert somebody, that could be God choosing you to be the cause of somebody else's salvation. God could choose to save one of your family members because you prayed for them, because God ultimately inspired that prayer within you. So this is not a magic trick. This is not guaranteed to cause conversions overnight, but this is a strategy that you can use with great success. And wait, before you go, let me tell you one thing. If you are a young man between the ages of, let's say, 20 and 35, and you want to work with me to get rid of your vices, to overcome your addictions, to become the man that God is calling you to be ready to be a husband and a father, then fill out the link in the description and we can set something up to chat one-on-one. We all know the final battle between the kingdom of God and Satan is over marriage and the family. And if we want to win that battle, we have to win fatherhood. So I'm putting together a group and I'm going to walk you through step by step everything you need to know to be a saintly husband and father. So fill out the link in the description. God bless.